President Trump seems to, at an intuitive level, understood how the outrage industry works. His campaign was based on using the tactics that we find so common in the outrage industry. For example, hosts always seemingly crossing a line of propriety, and people thinking, whoa, did he really say that? And President Trump did the same thing, particularly convincing voters, white working class voters, that political correctness had damaged the country and was had implications for their own financial well-being. That was directly out of Hannity and Fox, and he did it really effectively, I thought.
Yeah, it was like this perfect marriage between this personality who was saying these off-the-cuff, very shocking at the time, although we've all become a little bit more used to it, things, and press and broadcast and digital media environment that loved it. And so we saw the way he used the media, but also the way the media used him. And one of my favorite examples when I was giving talks during the campaign year about of this was that if you were reading the newspaper and it was online, say, and it was a story about a debate that happened, when you got to the bottom, there would be other stories you might be interested in. And what I started to notice was no matter what the story was, the photo was always of Donald Trump. So it could have been a story about the campaign in general, but it was Donald Trump. And so I started collecting, these screenshots that I called Donald in Triptych, because it was so clear looking at those images the way the media was leveraging him because of how interesting he was to us, right? For better and for worse, depending on, some people finding him offensive and other people finding him heroic, nearly, in the way that he speaks. One thing that we noticed a lot, and it comes up, I think, around chapter 5, is that when we were interviewing conservative fans of these shows in particular, one of the things that they really talked about was their fear of being seen as racist or sexist or homophobic, but in particular racist. And a lot of anguish about how other people might perceive them based on their political beliefs. And so I think one thing we noticed was that in the way Donald Trump spoke and continues to speak, he was standing up there and speaking the way that speaking sort of unapologetically the things that they may think or feel, but for which they had been shamed for speaking. So I think there was a real resonance between this brash, brazen, offensive, right, way of speaking and an audience who was tired, as you mentioned political correctness earlier, who was tired of what they felt like was a sort of policing of their vocabulary and thoughts and an invalidation of their ideas based on the words that they choose.
In the book, we talk about how the most popular hosts are trusted. So somebody like Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity, people that like them feel that they tell the truth and that they can trust them. And I think that's one of the reasons why Trump was able to get away with so many faux pas and intentional insults, because people thought he was really somebody who had character, who had a firm backbone, and was going to continue to act and speak the truth once he got into the White House.
Yeah, and it was interesting because there were cases where he said things that later turned out to not be true, but when you interviewed his supporters about what they liked about him, a lot of it was that he tells it like it is. And I think what that meant wasn't that he always speaks the truth per se, but that he's sticking to this backbone or ideological position that he holds and not compromising or being afraid to be who he was. And I think there was a real appeal, obviously, for a larger segment of the public than maybe people initially thought in that kind of speaking. And actually, like in the book, where we talk about outrage being not something so much that repels people, but that actually can be quite attractive to people, the same thing. I think for a liberal audience, hearing his comments on Mexicans as rapists or comments about women, for example, the liberal viewer or reader would think, okay, he's done. But not so, because that willingness to say those things, that offensiveness and outrage and not caring, was attractive in the same way that we talk about in the book, I think.